Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. It happened on a Tuesday night, over dinner. The table was set, the wine was poured, the food untouched. She looked at me across the table, her fork resting on the edge of her plate, and said the words with a casual shrug. "You were my biggest mistake in my youth." There was no hesitation in her voice, no regret, just cold dismissal, like I was nothing more than a bad purchase she'd made years ago and was finally admitting out loud. For a moment, the world around me went silent. I studied her face, calm, almost proud of herself, as though she had been holding this line for years, waiting for the right moment to cut me with it. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't ask her to explain. I simply looked her in the eye and said coldly, "Then I'll fix that now." Her expression shifted instantly. The confidence drained, replaced with confusion, maybe even a flicker of fear. She had expected me to break, to beg, to defend myself. Instead, I gave her nothing but resolve. I set my fork down, wiped my mouth with the napkin, and stood up. I walked to the office, opened the drawer where I kept the files, and pulled out the envelope I had prepared months ago. Divorce papers. Not yet filed, but ready. I had known this day would come. Every late night, every dismissive glance, every slip of contempt in her tone had told me this marriage was dying. Tonight, she just confirmed it. I placed the envelope on the table in front of her. She stared at it, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control of the conversation. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply told her the process was already in motion. Accounts would be split, assets divided, and by the end of the week, her access to my money would be gone. I reminded her of something she had forgotten. Everything she enjoyed in this life had been built on my shoulders. The rest of the meal sat untouched. She pushed her chair back, silent now, the arrogance gone. I cleared the plates, poured the wine down the sink, and left her sitting at the table with the papers staring back at her. That night, I didn't sleep on the couch. I didn't leave the house. I stayed in my bed, calm, steady, knowing that in less than 72 hours, she would regret the words she had spoken so carelessly. She thought she had delivered the final blow. What she didn't realize was that she had only unlocked the door I had been waiting to walk through. The next morning, she was quieter than usual. No sharp remarks over coffee, no impatient sighs as I moved around the kitchen. She sat at the table, staring at the divorce papers like they might disappear if she looked long enough. But they didn't. They stayed right where I had left them, solid and undeniable. She finally broke the silence by asking if I was serious. I told her I wasn't in the business of bluffing. She tried to laugh it off, saying I was overreacting, that people say things they don't mean during dinner conversations. I reminded her she hadn't said it in anger. She had said it like a fact, calmly, proudly, as though she was delivering a verdict. And I had simply accepted it. When she realized I wasn't softening, her tone shifted. She asked if we could slow down, think it through, maybe talk to someone. But I had already thought it through. I had thought it through on every night. She came home late with excuses. On every occasion, she dismissed my efforts. On every day, she treated me like an obligation rather than a partner. Last night wasn't the beginning. It was the end. By noon, I had spoken to my attorney. By the afternoon, her access to the joint accounts was cut off. I wasn't cruel about it. I left her what the law required, but nothing more. She had spent years living off my work while belittling it. That chapter was closed. When she tried to use her card that evening and it declined, she came storming into the house, her voice trembling with panic disguised as anger. She accused me of humiliating her, of making her look weak. I told her she had done that herself the moment she called me her biggest mistake. That night, she didn't smirk. She didn't toss casual remarks across the dinner table. She sat in silence, fidgeting, restless. The roles had shifted. She was the one on edge now, and I was calm. I could see it settling in, the realization that she wasn't the one pulling the strings anymore. For years, she had believed she could push me as far as she wanted, and I'd always bend back into place. But this time, I wasn't bending. I was cutting the strings entirely. And by the end of that second day, I knew something she didn't yet. In less than 72 hours, she wouldn't just regret her words. She would regret underestimating the man who had finally stopped playing her game. On the third morning, she finally cracked. I came downstairs to find her pacing the kitchen, her phone in her hand, messages flying out to anyone who would listen. I didn't need to read them to know what she was saying. She would be playing the victim, twisting the story, painting herself as a woman blindsided by a cold husband who had suddenly turned his back on her. But lies fall apart quickly when they're built on arrogance. By mid-afternoon, I had already heard from a friend who told me she'd called him in tears, claiming I had thrown everything away for no reason. He didn't buy it. No one did. People had seen the cracks long before I acted. They'd heard her sharp comments at gatherings, seen the way she dismissed me in public, watched her treat our marriage like a burden she carried instead of a life we built together. She tried to corner me that evening. She asked if this was really what I wanted, if I was ready to throw away years together. I didn't answer her question. Instead, I reminded her of her own words. "You were my biggest mistake in my youth." I told her I was simply giving her the freedom she claimed she wanted. Her face fell. For the first time, I saw regret in her eyes. Not love, not even respect, just the recognition that she had overplayed her hand. She thought she could tear me down with one line, and I would either fight for her or crumble. Instead, I had risen above it, cold and steady, untouchable. That night, she tried to stay in the house, hovering in the living room like she still belonged there. I didn't argue. I simply went upstairs, closed the door, and left her alone in the silence she had created. The next morning, her things were packed neatly in boxes by the door. I didn't throw them out, didn't scatter them in anger. I set them there with the same precision I used for everything else. Calm, deliberate, final. When she came down and saw them, her voice broke for the first time. She asked if we could just pause, if we could take a step back and try again. I told her the pause had already happened, years of it. She had paused love, paused respect, paused gratitude. And now, I was pressing play again, only without her in the picture. 72 hours hadn't even passed, and she was already unraveling. The woman who once believed she held all the power was finally seeing what it looked like when the man she dismissed stopped playing along. By the fourth day, the silence between us had become unbearable. For her, not for me. I had grown comfortable in it. The quiet gave me space to think, to breathe, to reclaim the man I had been before her contempt became the soundtrack of my life. But for her, silence was poison. She had lived for years off the sound of her own control, the echo of her smirks, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Now those words bounced back against walls that no longer absorbed them. She tried one last display of power. She dressed up, made dinner, set the table as if nothing had happened. When I came home, the smell of food filled the air, but there was no warmth in it. She sat waiting, her eyes fixed on me, expecting that the gesture would remind me of what we once had. But I wasn't hungry. I walked past the table, upstairs, and closed the door behind me. An hour later, she knocked on the bedroom door. Her voice was softer, unsteady. She asked if we could just sit together, talk it through. I didn't respond. I lay in bed, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. That was the moment it hit her. Control was gone, and it wasn't coming back. The next morning, I moved forward with everything. I met with the attorney again, finalized the accounts, and scheduled the change of locks. Each move was calculated, not rushed, not emotional. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing the comfort she had built around me, the safety net she believed would always be there no matter how cruel her words became. Her messages grew frantic. She told me she regretted what she said, that she hadn't meant it, that she was just tired, angry, overwhelmed. But the truth is simple. Words reveal what people carry inside, and in that moment at dinner, she showed me exactly how she saw me. A mistake. That truth couldn't be erased by regret. It couldn't be undone with apologies. Once spoken, it was final. By the end of that week, she was gone from the house. The rooms felt different without her presence, but not empty. Lighter, freer, mine again. I didn't celebrate. I didn't mourn. I just lived. And while she scrambled to rewrite her story, I stepped into a life that no longer revolved around her. The silence she feared had become my strength, and her words, the ones meant to destroy me, had become the reason I finally walked away for good. After she left, the house was unrecognizable. It wasn't just cleaner or quieter. It felt like a different place altogether. For the first time in years, I could sit in my living room without waiting for footsteps at the door, without bracing for another comment disguised as a joke, without carrying the weight of her contempt. It was mine again, and that realization filled me with a calm I hadn't known in years. But calm didn't mean she was gone. She tried to keep a tether, leaving messages that swung between rage and desperation. One morning, I woke up to a text saying I'd ruined her life. By afternoon, another came apologizing, saying she missed me, begging me to give her another chance. I didn't reply, not once. Silence was the answer she couldn't stand. She thought she could rally support, so she started calling people we knew. But the story she told didn't hold. To one person, she said I had abandoned her without warning. To another, she claimed she had walked away on her own terms. Her contradictions betrayed her, and soon enough, people stopped entertaining her calls. Even her closest friends began to reach out to me, saying they finally understood what I had lived with. The more she spiraled, the steadier I became. I poured my energy into myself, my work, my health, my future. Every day without her was another step forward, another reminder that I had been carrying dead weight for far too long. She once told me I was her biggest mistake. But the truth was clear. She had mistaken my loyalty for weakness, and she was paying the price for it now. One evening, I heard her car outside. She sat in the driveway for nearly 20 minutes, engine running, but she never came to the door. I watched from the window as she finally drove away. That was the moment I knew she wasn't just losing me. She was losing the courage to even face me. The power she once held was gone, and she couldn't bear to see what I had become without her. By the end of that week, the regret she thought she'd never feel was etched all over her actions. She had spoken those words so casually at dinner, like she was untouchable. But now, she was the one broken by them, and I was the one who had turned them into the reason she no longer had a place in my life. By the sixth day, the silence had become her punishment. I didn't have to chase her, didn't have to shout, didn't even have to remind her of what she'd said. My absence did the work for me. Every call I ignored, every message left unanswered, deepened the reality she could no longer escape. I wasn't hers anymore. I saw it in the way she tried to reach me indirectly. She began posting photos online, smiling wide with friends, pretending her life was thriving. But people noticed the cracks. The smiles didn't reach her eyes, the captions sounded forced, and the people around her looked more like props than companions. It was a performance, staged to convince herself she still had control. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward faster than I expected. At work, my focus was sharper. My boss noticed, and within a week, I was offered a bigger role on a major project. My colleagues said I seemed lighter, stronger, like I had stepped out from under a weight they hadn't realized I was carrying. They were right. At home, I started reclaiming pieces of myself I had buried. Old hobbies came back. Things she used to mock me for, calling them childish or a waste of time. I picked them up again and found joy in them. The man I had been before her contempt took root was resurfacing, stronger than before. And then came the call that proved everything. Late one night, my phone rang. It was her, voice unsteady, almost breaking. She said she regretted what she had said at dinner, that she didn't mean it, that she had been stupid and cruel. She told me she wanted to come home, that she couldn't live without me. I listened, silent. She waited for me to interrupt, to soften, to let her back in. But I didn't. When she realized I wasn't going to answer, her tone changed. She grew angry, accused me of enjoying her pain, of punishing her. I let the silence stretch until she hung up on her own. When the call ended, I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. The woman who once believed she was too good for me, who thought she could reduce me to a mistake, was now unraveling without my presence. And I understood then, regret wasn't enough. She could beg, she could cry, she could rage, but nothing would change the fact that she had revealed her truth. And once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. By the seventh day, she was no longer the woman who sat across from me at that dinner table, smirking as she called me her biggest mistake. She was a shadow of that arrogance, worn down by silence, by consequences she never thought would touch her. She used to believe she was untouchable, but now she was the one reaching out from the dark, desperate for a lifeline I had no intention of throwing back. That morning, I received a message from her sister. She said Lauren had shown up at her house, shaken, crying, saying she didn't know what to do. For years, Lauren had mocked me to her family, painting me as weak, predictable, the man who would always come crawling back no matter how far she pushed. Now she was sitting in her sister's kitchen, admitting she couldn't survive without me. I didn't respond. I didn't need to defend myself, not to her family, not to anyone. The truth was unfolding in front of them without me lifting a finger. Meanwhile, my own days grew fuller. My focus at work earned me recognition, but beyond that, I started rebuilding my life with purpose. I joined an old friend for a gym session, something I hadn't done in years. I said yes to an invitation for a weekend trip I would have once turned down because she didn't like me being away. My life no longer fit inside the cage she had built, and every step outside it made me stronger. That evening, she came back to the house. She didn't knock. She still had a key. I heard the door open, heard her heels on the floor, and then her voice calling out, soft at first, then louder, demanding. She walked into the kitchen and froze when she saw the locks changed on the cabinets. Her name removed from the accounts I kept neatly filed on the counter, every trace of her access erased. She asked if we could just start over, said she didn't mean what she'd said at dinner, that she was angry, tired, lost. I looked at her and stayed silent. No anger, no argument, just stillness. That silence was louder than anything I could have said. And when she realized it, when she saw that the man she thought she controlled no longer existed, the tears came. Not graceful tears, not the kind that invite sympathy. Desperate tears. The kind that come when someone finally understands they've lost everything, and it's never coming back. She didn't leave right away that night. She lingered in the kitchen, standing over the divorce papers she had once mocked, like they were a threat that finally became real. Her eyes darted between me and the stack of documents, searching for some crack in my resolve. But there was none. She tried everything. Anger, guilt, promises. She said I was cruel, that I was throwing away years of marriage, that no one would ever love me the way she had. Then she pivoted, softening her tone, saying she could change, that we could start fresh if I would just tear up those papers and forget what she said at dinner. But forgetting wasn't an option. You don't forget when someone looks you in the eye and calls you their biggest mistake. That kind of truth doesn't disappear just because they regret the consequences. I walked past her, placed her suitcase by the door, and reminded her calmly that her time here was finished. She followed me, voice cracking now, asking where she was supposed to go, how she was supposed to manage on her own. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said it all. Those were questions she should have thought about before she tried to shatter me with words. The next morning, I found her gone. The suitcase was missing, the car no longer in the driveway. But she had left something behind, a note on the counter. In rushed handwriting, she wrote that she hadn't meant what she said, that I was the only stability she'd ever had, that she didn't know how to live without me. I folded the note once, dropped it into the trash, and went on with my day. For years, I had been the one carrying her weight, cleaning up her messes, forgiving her contempt. Now, I didn't even pause. At work, I poured myself into the new role I had been offered. My colleagues noticed the change. They said I carried myself differently, sharper, more confident. And they were right. I wasn't just moving on. I was becoming someone stronger than she ever thought I could be. Meanwhile, word reached me that she was struggling. The friends she had leaned on were tired of her drama. Her family was distancing themselves, and the image she projected online was collapsing under its own lies. She was unraveling, piece by piece. And the irony was undeniable. She had called me her mistake, but now she was drowning in the reality that losing me had been hers. The weeks that followed revealed the full weight of her downfall. Without me, her carefully constructed facade crumbled faster than I expected. She had built her life around my stability, my paycheck, my discipline, my silence. Without those pillars holding her up, everything collapsed. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she was already behind on rent, asking for loans, trying to stretch favors from people who no longer wanted to hear her complaints. She had once mocked me in front of those same people, calling me boring, predictable, too cautious. Now she was the one they whispered about, shaking their heads as they watched her unravel. Meanwhile, my world expanded. I wasn't just surviving without her. I was thriving. My work performance soared, and my team began to rely on me as a leader. Outside of work, I filled my days with things she had once ridiculed. I picked up old hobbies, reconnected with friends, and even joined a hiking group that met every weekend. Every step up those trails felt symbolic, as if I was climbing out of the wreckage she had left behind. She tried to reach out again, this time through a letter delivered to my office. It was long, emotional, dripping with regret. She wrote that she had been foolish, that her words at dinner weren't true, that she had said them only to provoke me. She begged me to remember the good times, to give her one more chance to make things right. I read it once, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the shredder. My coworkers saw the envelope but never asked about it. They didn't need to. My face said everything. It was over, and I was unshakable. What she never understood was that my silence wasn't revenge. It was transformation. I wasn't interested in punishing her. I was interested in reclaiming myself, in proving that I could rise without anger, without shouting, without chasing. And that was what unsettled her the most. She had expected a war of words, a tug of emotions, a battle she could manipulate. Instead, she faced a man who refused to fight, who simply walked away and built a life so far above her reach that she couldn't even touch it. By then, her regret wasn't measured in tears or apologies. It was measured in the stark contrast between us. She was falling, and I was rising. And she knew, with brutal certainty, that the distance between us was permanent. The final time I saw her was by accident. I was walking out of a coffee shop when she came in through the same door. For a moment, we both froze. She looked different, thinner, drained, carrying the weight of choices she couldn't take back. There was no smirk on her face this time, no sharp remark ready to cut. Just silence, heavy and awkward. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a plea. I didn't give her the chance. I nodded once, polite but detached, and walked past her without breaking stride. That single moment said more than any words could have. She no longer lived in my world, and she never would again. Later that evening, I thought about the journey. About that dinner table where she had looked me in the eye and called me her biggest mistake. I remembered the cold certainty in my voice when I told her I would fix that. And I realized that was the moment everything shifted. She thought she had wounded me beyond repair. Instead, she had freed me. The life I had built since then wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about proving myself right. I was stronger, sharper, more complete than I had ever been with her. The silence I carried wasn't emptiness. It was power. Power she could never touch, because it was built on something she had spent years trying to crush, my resilience. I heard, months later, that she was still struggling, still bouncing between couches, still chasing the stability she once mocked, still carrying the regret she thought she'd never feel. Maybe she finally understood that calling me her mistake didn't just end our marriage. It ended the illusion that she was untouchable. And me? I didn't look back. I didn't wonder what could have been. I didn't regret the years lost, because they had forged the man I became. A man who didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't crumble. A man who acted with precision, who walked away without leaving the door open behind him. She once said I was her biggest mistake in her youth. But the truth was far sharper. Her biggest mistake wasn't marrying me. It was underestimating me. And by the time she realized it, her regret had already arrived too late. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.